Your idea is stupid, and you'll lose everything, Patricia Morrison said, not unkindly, setting down her Cosmopolitan with the casual certainty of someone who spent 40 years being right about things that mattered. She was sitting in my mother's living room on a Sunday afternoon in March, and I was presenting my startup concept to the two women who essentially raised me, my mother and her best friend of 35 years. What I'd expected was skepticism. What I got was demolition delivered with a smile. Yet the twist came not from Patricia's assessment itself, which was harsh but not unexpected from a woman who built a successful career by being aggressively pragmatic, but from the fact that 6 months later, I would actually start the company anyway, and 5 years after that, I would be sitting across from Patricia in an interview room. And she would be the one holding the portfolio that needed reviewing, and the power dynamic would shift in ways that neither of us had anticipated. What would she say when she realized I was about to decide whether she got hired? My name is Catherine Summers, and I've spent the last 7 years learning that the people who discourage you are often the people most threatened by your potential. Patricia Morrison wasn't a villain. That's what made the whole thing more complicated. She was a woman who'd clawed her way into a 40-year career in corporate marketing, who'd overcome real obstacles, who'd built genuine expertise in her field. She was my mother's closest friend. She'd attended my birthday parties, helped me navigate high school, offered advice about college. She was a fixture in my life, which was exactly why her skepticism had the power to wound. When I told her about my startup idea, a software platform designed to help small businesses manage their supply chains without needing a team of logistics experts, she listened politely the way you listen to someone you love when they're about to make a mistake. I appreciate the confidence you have in yourself, she'd said, which was the corporate equivalent of bless your heart. But you're looking at an extremely saturated market. There are hundreds of solutions already out there. What makes you think yours would be different? Because the ones that exist are either too expensive or too complicated, I said. I'd prepared for this question. I'd done market research, competitive analysis, user interviews. There's a gap in the market for something intuitive, affordable, and actually designed for small business owners rather than enterprise clients. Intuitive and affordable, Patricia repeated, like I'd just suggested I was going to solve world hunger with a sandwich. So basically, you're going to create something that costs less money than the competition and works better. That's not a business plan, that's a fantasy. You understand that businesses need margins, that you can't just undercut on price and expect to survive. I'm not undercutting on price, I said. I'm reducing unnecessary complexity. The overhead is lower, so the margins are still healthy. Catherine, my mother said gently, which meant she was siding with Patricia, which meant this conversation was about to become a 2-on-1 situation. What? I said. You think it's a bad idea too? I think it's risky, my mother said carefully. You have a good job right now. You have stability. Why would you give that up? Because stability isn't the same as fulfillment, I said. And because if I don't try this now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done it. Patricia exchanged a look with my mother, the kind of look that said she's young and idealistic and we need to be gentle about crushing her dream star. Okay, Patricia said, and she set down her drink and looked at me with the expression of someone about to dispense hard-earned wisdom. Let me tell you what actually happens when startups fail, because I've seen it up close. You burn through savings. You damage relationships with friends and family who you'll try to recruit. You lose confidence. You get depressed. And then you have to go back into the job market trying to explain why you have a gap on your resume. I'm saying this because I care about you. Don't do this. Don't throw away your future on an idea that probably won't work. I listened. I nodded. I appreciated that she cared enough to try to protect me from what she saw as inevitable failure. And then I started the company anyway. The first year was brutal in ways that had nothing to do with the market and everything to do with psychology. Every time something went wrong, a bug in the code, a client cancellation, a payment processing issue, I heard Patricia's voice in my head. See? This is what happens. Every time I had a moment of doubt, which was often and intense, I thought about her certainty that I would fail, and I used it as fuel. I worked 70-hour weeks. I brought on a technical co-founder named James who believed in the vision even when I didn't. We bootstrapped the company, which meant we funded it ourselves through our savings and freelance work. We slept in the office some nights. We ate a lot of instant ramen. We built the product in the gaps between our survival jobs. By year 2, something unexpected happened. People actually wanted what we'd built. Not just a few early adopters, but actual paying customers. Real businesses were using our platform to manage their supply chains. They were saving money. They were saving time. They were leaving reviews that said things like, "This is exactly what I've been looking for, and I can't believe this costs less than the enterprise solutions." By year 3, we'd raised a small seed round from an angel investor. By year 4, we'd hit profitability. By year 5, we were being pursued by several venture capital firms interested in series of funding. I never told Patricia any of this. Not because I was deliberately hiding my success, but because every time I considered reaching out, I remembered the conversation in my mother's living room, and I couldn't quite figure out how to bridge that gap. My mother mentioned occasionally that Patricia had asked about me, but that didn't feel like an opening. That felt like an obligation I wasn't ready to fulfill. The news came through LinkedIn. I was scrolling through my feed during a lunch break when I saw it. Patricia Morrison had updated her profile. She was now listed as seeking opportunities in marketing and business strategy. The previous position, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Caldwell & Associates, was now in her past. I didn't think much of it at first. Corporate changes happen all the time. But then my mother called. Patricia's company had to downsize, she said, her voice carrying the particular tone she used when delivering bad news carefully. Restructuring. They laid off about 40% of the management team. Patricia was one of them. "Oh," I said. "That's rough." "She's been in a funk," my mother said. "She keeps saying that she's too old to start over, that nobody's going to hire a 58-year-old woman in a market that values youth. I'm worried about her, Katie. She's been so confident her whole life. This is hitting her hard." I made the appropriate sympathetic noises, and I didn't tell my mother that I was currently looking to hire a senior vice president of marketing for my company. I didn't tell her that Patricia's skill set would have been perfect a year ago, but we'd since moved beyond the type of marketing strategy Patricia specialized in. I didn't tell her that the role we were hiring for required someone who understood venture capital, growth hacking, and scaling tech startups, all things that Patricia had dismissed when I was building them. But then my phone rang, and it was our recruiter, and they said something that made me pause. "We got an application for the SVP of marketing role," they said. "From Patricia Morrison. The application materials are excellent. Her background is impressive. Should I schedule an interview?" I could have said no. I could have told them to pass. Nobody would have questioned it. The hiring decision was ultimately mine. Instead, I said, "Schedule the interview. But put me in the room for it." Patricia arrived 12 minutes early for her interview on a Tuesday morning in November. She was dressed impeccably, tailored suit, pearls, the kind of polish that comes from 40 years of professional presentation. She looked like someone who'd been knocked down but was determined to pretend nothing had changed. She looked like someone terrified. The interview was conducted by our hiring manager, David, and me. I sat slightly behind, letting David take the lead, letting her answer questions about her experience, her approach to marketing, her strategy for the kind of scaling that a Series A startup requires. She was good. She was really good. She had answers about brand positioning and market penetration and customer acquisition costs that were intelligent and strategic. She talked about learning to adapt to new technology, about understanding that marketing had evolved since the early days of her career. She sounded like someone who was ready to change, ready to learn, ready to be part of something new. And then David asked her about her experience with startups. "I've primarily worked in established corporate environments," she said, which was true. "But I understand that startups require a different approach. More agility. More innovation. More tolerance for uncertainty. Do you have any experience with companies in the supply chain software space?" David asked. "Not directly," she said. "Though I've been monitoring the market, and I've been impressed by some of the innovative solutions that have emerged." She didn't look at me when she said it. She was still focused on David. "Actually," I said, and I heard my voice as if it was coming from outside my body, as if I was listening to someone else speak. "There's one supply chain software company that's done particularly well in the market. Summers and Associates. Have you heard of it?" Patricia's eyes shifted to me. I watched the moment of recognition happen. I watched her recalibrate everything, not just this moment, but the entire landscape of the last 5 years that she'd been dismissing my idea as stupid. "Summers," she said carefully. That's your last name. It is, I said. We founded the company 5 years ago. Just went profitable last year. We're raising series of funding right now. We're looking for a senior vice president of marketing who understands how to scale tech companies in a competitive market. She looked between me and David, and I watched her process what was happening. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a random interview. This was her former best friend's daughter, the one she'd tried to discourage from pursuing exactly this kind of venture, now sitting across from her as the person who would decide whether she got hired. I see, she said quietly. The thing about the market, I continued, is that it turned out to be exactly what I said it was. Underserved. Full of potential for someone who could build something intuitive and affordable. We're now serving about 3,000 small businesses. Our retention rate is 94%. Our customer satisfaction score is consistently above 4.8 out of 5. Patricia didn't say anything. I'm telling you this not to gloat, I said, and I meant it. But because I want you to understand something. 5 years ago, you told me my idea was stupid. You told me I would fail. You told me I should give up. And I appreciate that you were trying to protect me from what you saw as inevitable failure. But what you didn't understand was that your skepticism was rooted in your experience in a world that moves much more slowly than the one I was trying to enter. Catherine, she started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished, I said. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that you reapplying to work for someone you tried to discourage. And I need to know if you can actually be excited about what I've built, or if you're just here because you're desperate and it's the only opportunity available. Patricia looked down at her hands for a long moment. When she looked back up, her eyes were red. I owe you an apology, she said. Multiple apologies. I was wrong about your idea. I was wrong about your capability. I was wrong about the market. And I was wrong to try to discourage you because I couldn't see what you could see. Why were you actually discouraging me? I asked, because I needed to know the answer. Because I was afraid, she said, and the admission seemed to cost her something. I was afraid that you represented something I didn't understand. That if you succeeded with something I'd said would fail, it would mean that my expertise, my experience, my understanding of how the world works, it would all mean less than I thought it did. So I tried to convince you that the world worked the way I understood it to work, not the way it actually works. It was such an honest answer that I had to believe it. I hired Patricia Morrison as the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Summers and Associates. Not because I owed her anything. Not because I felt sorry for her. Not because I needed to prove something to her. But because when I asked her in the follow-up conversations whether she could actually do the job, she was honest about what she didn't know. She was willing to learn. She was excited about the product in a way that suggested genuine enthusiasm rather than desperation. The first few months were awkward. Patricia had to recalibrate how she thought about marketing for a software startup. She had to learn about growth hacking and product-led growth and all the approaches that diverged from her traditional corporate marketing expertise. She made mistakes. She asked questions that probably should have been obvious to someone with her background. She had moments where she clearly wanted to do things the way she always had and had to stop herself. But she also brought genuine value. Her understanding of positioning helped us articulate our value proposition more clearly. Her experience with brand building helped us think about long-term company identity rather than just short-term growth. Her strategic thinking, once redirected toward the startup context, was actually a significant asset. And more importantly, she approached the work with humility. She approached me with respect. She asked for feedback. She seemed to genuinely understand that she was the junior person in this particular dynamic, regardless of our age difference. By the time we closed our series of funding round 18 months later, Patricia had become an essential part of the company's growth strategy. The lead investor specifically mentioned our marketing approach as one of the compelling aspects of our pitch. We hired a larger team underneath Patricia. We moved into a bigger office. We went from 40 employees to nearly 80. At our Series A celebration party, my mother pulled me aside. Patricia told me she's very grateful, my mother said. She said you could have easily chosen not to hire her, and you did anyway. She said it's changed how she thinks about everything. It was the right business decision, I said, which was true but not the whole truth. I know, my mother said. But it was also a kind decision. And I'm proud of you for that. Patricia approached me later that evening, when I was standing near the window looking out at the Philadelphia skyline. Thank you, she said simply. For what? I asked. For letting me be part of this. For giving me a chance to understand the world differently. For not punishing me for being wrong about you. You're a good marketing strategist, I said. The company needed what you have to offer. That's reason enough. But you also could have held a grudge, she said. You could have let my discouragement of you become a reason to prove me wrong by never hiring me, by making sure I never got to see what you'd built from the inside. That would have been understandable. It would have also been petty, I said. And it wouldn't have served the company. No, she agreed. It wouldn't have. We stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the city lights. I'm sorry for what I said 5 years ago, Patricia said quietly. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. I know, I said. And I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago, actually. I just needed to prove to myself that you were wrong before I could move past it. Did you need to hire me to do that? She asked, with a slight smile that suggested she knew the answer. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. Or maybe I just realized that vindication is less interesting than building something great together. Epilogue. Patricia stayed with Summers and Associates for 4 years, until our Series B round and subsequent growth made the company too large for her current role. She could have stayed and moved into a different position, but she made the decision to step back, to return to consulting, to use what she'd learned to help other startups think through their marketing strategy. Before she left, she wrote me an email. Thank you, it said, for showing me that being wrong doesn't mean being worthless. Thank you for hiring me when you could have rejected me. Thank you for treating me as a colleague rather than as a cautionary tale. Thank you for letting me be part of something that changed my understanding of what's possible. I kept the email. I read it sometimes when I'm making hiring decisions for the company, when I'm thinking about whether to give someone a chance. The truth is that Patricia's initial skepticism probably did make my startup stronger. It made me more certain of my convictions. It made me more thorough in my research. It made me understand that people who doubt you aren't always wrong, sometimes just limited by their own experience. The greater truth, though, is that proving someone wrong is less satisfying than building something great with them. Power doesn't come from demonstrating that someone else was wrong about you. Power comes from being so secure in your own worth that you can afford to be generous with people who underestimated you. Patricia tried to keep me small. And I used her doubt as fuel to build something big. But the real victory wasn't in proving her wrong. The real victory was in showing her, and myself, that there was room for both of us in the success that followed. That generosity, it turned out, was worth more than vindication ever could have been.